The world knew John Denver as the man with the golden voice, a troubadour whose songs carried the scent of pine trees, the whisper of mountain winds, and the yearning for a simpler, gentler world. His melodies like Take Me Home, Country Roads, Rocky Mountain High, and Annie's Song became anthems of love, freedom, and nature. Behind his boyish smile and wholesome image was a man who shaped the musical landscape of the 1970s and earned the adoration of millions. But for those who truly knew him, those closest to his heart, John Denver was more than a voice or a guitar. He was a husband, a father, and a man wrestling with the weight of stardom and the complexity of human flaws. At the center of his most intimate life chapter was Annie Martel, the woman who inspired one of the most romantic ballads ever written, a song that would immortalize their love in music history. Yet, behind that love story lay a shadow, a rumor that followed John Denver long after their marriage ended, a rumor that Annie herself never fully addressed, until now. At 78 years old, Annie Denver finally breaks decades of silence, confirming a truth that will surprise many and, for some, completely change the way they see the man behind the music. Henry John Duchendorf Jr., the man the world would come to know as John Denver, was born on December 31, 1943, in Roswell, New Mexico. His childhood was far from settled. As the son of an Air Force officer, his family moved frequently, and young Henry often felt uprooted. The constant relocations left him yearning for stability and belonging, something he would later find in music. John's love for music began early. His grandmother gave him a 1910 Gibson guitar when he was just 11 years old. That gift was more than a musical instrument, it was an escape, a companion, and eventually, a gateway to a life he never imagined possible. By his teenage years, he had already begun writing songs, pouring his feelings into melodies that spoke of home, nature, and the search for peace. In college, he studied architecture at Texas Tech University but soon realized his heart was in music, not drafting blueprints. He dropped out, changed his name to John Denver, after the capital city of his beloved Colorado, and set out for Los Angeles to chase a dream that seemed as vast and uncertain as the western skies he often sang about. Life in Los Angeles wasn't easy. The city was full of hopeful musicians, all vying for the same dream. John played in small clubs, sang backup, and hustled to get his songs heard. There were nights when he questioned if he had made the right choice, nights when the loneliness of the city pressed hard against him. But his persistence would soon pay off. John Denver's big break came when he joined the Chad Mitchell Trio in the mid-1960s, replacing Chad Mitchell himself. It was during this time that John honed his stage presence and began to build a fan base. But he wanted more than to be a folk singer in a group. He had songs of his own that he wanted the world to hear. In 1969, Peter, Paul, and Mary recorded his song Leaving on a Jet Plane, which became a major hit. That success opened the door for John's solo career, and soon after, he released his first albums under RCA Records. By the early 1970s, John Denver was a household name. By the mid-1970s, John Denver was one of the most beloved artists in America. He wasn't just a singer, he was an icon of wholesome values, environmental consciousness, and heartfelt music. He sold millions of albums, appeared on television specials, and even acted in films like Oh God, alongside George Burns. But fame, as it often does, came with its own price. Behind the adoring fans, sold-out concerts, and awards was a marriage struggling to withstand the storms of celebrity life. In the late 1960s, before John Denver became a superstar, he met a young woman named Annie Martel. Their love story began in the most unassuming way, through mutual friends and shared values. Annie was sweet, down-to-earth, and loved John not for his fame but for the man he was before the spotlight found him. They married in 1967, in a quiet ceremony filled with hope and dreams of a simple life together. For a time, they had that life. In their home nestled in the Colorado mountains, they built a world of love, laughter, and music. It was during one of these blissful moments that John, overwhelmed by his feelings for Annie, sat down and wrote what would become one of the most iconic love songs of all time, Annie's Song. The story goes that John wrote the song in about 10 minutes while riding a ski lift in Aspen. The lyrics were a love letter to Annie, an outpouring of gratitude and devotion. When he played it for her, Annie was moved to tears. The song would go on to top the charts and become an enduring testament to their love. To the outside world, John and Annie were the perfect couple, a love story captured in melody. But behind the scenes, cracks were beginning to show. The pressures of fame, constant touring, and John's perfectionist nature started to strain their relationship. The man who sang about peace and harmony was wrestling with his own inner turbulence. By the mid-1970s, John Denver was living the dream, or so it seemed. His songs dominated the charts, his albums sold millions, and his wholesome image made him America's favorite singer-songwriter. Fans adored his radiant smile, his gentle voice, and the idyllic life he appeared to lead in the Colorado Rockies. But behind the curtain of fame, John and Annie's marriage was under strain. Success had a way of amplifying everything: pressure, expectations, and insecurities. John was no longer the struggling musician Annie had fallen in love with. He was a global superstar, constantly touring, recording, and appearing on television. For Annie, who cherished privacy and simplicity, this new life was overwhelming. Suddenly, their quiet home in Aspen became a hub of attention, with reporters and fans invading their personal space. The rumors began innocently enough: whispers of marital tension, stories of John's demanding schedule, and suggestions that the couple was growing apart. But soon, tabloids began speculating about more serious issues. Was John Denver unfaithful? Was the perfect marriage just an illusion? Annie kept her silence. She avoided interviews, declined invitations to gossip shows, and focused on holding her family together. But those close to the couple saw the signs. The arguments were becoming more frequent, the smiles for the cameras less genuine. Fame had given John Denver everything he thought he wanted, but it was slowly eroding the one thing he valued most: his marriage. The music reflected his inner turmoil. Songs once filled with unbridled optimism began carrying undertones of melancholy. John was searching for balance, but the more he tried to control the chaos around him, the more it slipped through his fingers. This need for control would become a defining trait, and eventually, the center of a rumor that haunted his legacy for decades. To the world, John Denver was a symbol of peace, love, and harmony. But fame can cast long shadows, and John was no exception. Friends and associates later admitted that John had a temper, a side of him the public rarely saw. He could be passionate and intense, qualities that made him an incredible performer, but those same traits sometimes spilled into his personal life. In his autobiography Take Me Home, published posthumously, John himself admitted to behavior that shocked fans. He wrote about moments of rage during the collapse of his marriage, episodes that contradicted the gentle image the world adored. One particular confession sent shockwaves. John revealed that during a heated argument, he once took a chainsaw to the marital bed, cutting it in half. That single incident became the centerpiece of a rumor that persisted for decades, a rumor that Annie never publicly confirmed or denied. Did it really happen as John described? Was it a moment of symbolic frustration or something far darker? Fans speculated endlessly, turning it into one of the most notorious stories in rock and folk history. The chainsaw incident wasn't the only red flag. John admitted to being controlling, even obsessive at times. Fame had inflated his ego, and the stress of balancing career and marriage often pushed him to extremes. He struggled with alcohol and later, with personal demons that he never fully conquered. For Annie, these years were excruciating. She had married a man who once wrote her love songs and promised her the stars. Now she lived with someone she barely recognized, a man consumed by the demands of celebrity, a man whose anger frightened her. She loved him deeply, but love was no longer enough. The rumors about John's temper, his outbursts, and his need for control spread quietly through the industry. They were whispered in recording studios, at parties, and among journalists who suspected the truth but lacked confirmation. And through it all, Annie remained silent, protecting both John's legacy and her own dignity. When John and Annie finally divorced in 1982, the announcement shattered fans' hearts. For years, they had believed in the fairy tale, a love so pure it had inspired one of the greatest love songs ever written. If John and Annie couldn't make it, what hope did anyone have? The divorce fueled speculation. Why did they really split? Was it infidelity? Was it John's temper? Or was it simply the crushing weight of fame? The tabloids had their theories, but one rumor rose above all others: the chainsaw story. It was a story too bizarre to ignore, a tale of rage so theatrical it seemed ripped from a movie script. Fans debated its authenticity endlessly. Some dismissed it as an exaggeration, a rock star's confession designed to shock. Others believed it entirely, pointing to John's own words in his autobiography as evidence. For Annie, the rumor was a heavy burden. She had endured the reality behind the headlines, and while she moved on with grace and dignity, the whispers followed her everywhere. Interviewers tiptoed around the subject, fans speculated in hushed tones, and John's confessions only deepened the mystery. And then, John Denver was gone. His tragic death in 1997 ended any chance of him clarifying the story further. For decades, Annie kept silent, never confirming, never denying. Until now, at the age of 78, she finally speaks, revealing the truth about the man she loved, the rumor that never died, and the pain that still lingers all these years later. The official end of John and Annie Denver's marriage in 1982 marked the closing of one of music's most iconic love stories. For Annie, the divorce was both devastating and liberating. She had loved John deeply, but the turbulence of fame and the weight of his personal struggles had made life unbearable. After 15 years of marriage, She stepped away from the spotlight and chose a life of quiet solitude. Annie retreated from public attention almost entirely. She settled in Aspen, Colorado, close to the mountains that had been such a central part of their shared life. Friends described her as graceful and private, someone who valued peace over publicity. While John moved forward with a career still in motion, Annie focused on healing and rediscovering herself outside of being John Denver's wife. For John, the years following the divorce were complicated. He married again in 1988 to Australian actress Cassandra Delaney, but that marriage too ended in divorce after just a few years. Despite his struggles in relationships, John longed for family and fatherhood. He adopted 2 children, Zachary and Anna Kate, during his marriage to Annie and later welcomed Jessie Bell with Cassandra. Fatherhood was one of the few things that grounded him, and he often spoke about how much he loved being a dad. Professionally, the 1980s brought challenges. The folk sound that had made him a star was losing traction in a world dominated by pop, rock, and the rise of MTV. Yet, John remained a respected figure. He continued to record, tour internationally, and even experiment with different musical styles. His concerts still drew loyal fans who came to hear the songs that had defined their youth. But beneath the surface, John wrestled with the same inner demons that had contributed to the collapse of his marriage. His perfectionism, his temper, and his need for control were never fully resolved. The rumors of his darker side persisted, though rarely discussed openly. For Annie, silence became her shield. She never spoke publicly about John's flaws, never joined the chorus of speculation. Instead, she let the years pass quietly, holding her memories close, both the beautiful and the painful. By the early 1990s, John Denver was experiencing something of a renaissance. Nostalgia for his music was growing, and new generations were discovering his work. He performed at benefit concerts, recorded fresh material, and released compilation albums that sold well. He became an outspoken advocate for environmental causes, using his platform to raise awareness about climate change, conservation, and world hunger. John's passion for nature wasn't just lyrical, it was lived. He loved the outdoors, the mountains, the forests, and the open skies. And more than anything, he loved flying. Aviation had fascinated him since childhood, and by adulthood, it became one of his greatest joys. John often piloted small planes and spoke about the serenity he felt in the cockpit, high above the earth, where the noise of the world faded and the sky belonged only to him. But flying carried risks, and friends worried about his devotion to experimental aircraft. John brushed off their concerns. He was confident, meticulous, and believed in living life fully, without fear. For him, flying wasn't just a hobby, it was freedom. Yet behind the scenes, personal struggles continued. John faced multiple DUI arrests in the 1990s, which tarnished his clean-cut image. He also dealt with financial challenges and career frustrations. Still, he seemed hopeful, often speaking about new music projects and his enduring love for Colorado. It was during these final years that the rumors from his first marriage occasionally resurfaced in interviews and profiles. John never shied away from acknowledging his faults. In fact, he admitted them openly, writing in his autobiography about moments of rage, including the infamous chainsaw incident. But Annie remained silent, never offering her side of the story, never confirming whether the man the world adored had truly had such a dark edge behind closed doors. Then came October 12, 1997, a date that would forever mark the end of an era. It was a crisp autumn day on October 12, 1997, when John Denver climbed into the cockpit of his experimental aircraft, a Rutan Long-EZ, at the Monterey Peninsula Airport in California. He was 53 years old, still vibrant, still full of plans, still beloved by millions. Friends recalled how excited he had been about flying that day, eager to take the plane up despite warnings about its quirks. John was an experienced pilot, but the aircraft he flew that afternoon had a problematic fuel system. During the flight, while soaring above the sparkling waters of Monterey Bay, something went terribly wrong. Witnesses later reported seeing the plane plunge into the ocean after an apparent loss of control. The impact was catastrophic. John Denver, America's folk hero, the voice of the mountains, was gone in an instant. News of the crash spread like wildfire, sending shockwaves across the globe. Fans wept openly. Radio stations played his songs in endless tribute. Television anchors spoke solemnly about the life and legacy of a man whose music had touched countless hearts. In Aspen, candlelight vigils filled the crisp mountain air with grief and song. For Annie, the news was crushing. Though they had been divorced for 15 years, John had been a defining part of her life, a first love, a husband, the father of her children. She issued a brief statement expressing sorrow, but as always, kept her emotions private. While the world mourned publicly, Annie grieved in silence. The crash investigation revealed mechanical issues and pilot error, but none of that mattered to those who loved him. What mattered was the void he left behind, the silence where his music had always been, the absence of a man whose voice had once been the soundtrack of so many lives. In death, John Denver became immortal. His songs surged on the charts again. Tributes poured in from presidents, celebrities, and everyday people. But even as the world celebrated his legacy, one question lingered in the shadows, the question tied to that old rumor, the one Annie never addressed. And now, more than 2 decades later, at 78 years old, Annie Denver finally breaks her silence. The world mourned John Denver in a way reserved for legends. His death on October 12, 1997, sent shockwaves across continents. News channels ran continuous tributes, radio stations played his greatest hits, and fans gathered in candlelight vigils from Aspen to Australia. The man who had sung about country roads and mountain highs was gone, but his music became louder than ever. In Aspen, where John had built his sanctuary, hundreds gathered to celebrate his life. They sang his songs under the crisp autumn sky, voices trembling with grief but rising with love. The mountains he adored stood silently, bearing witness to the sorrow of those who had found joy in his melodies. Tributes poured in from everywhere. President Bill Clinton called John Denver, a man whose music gave voice to the beauty of our land and the values we hold dear. Fellow musicians hailed him as a pioneer of contemporary folk. Fans left thousands of letters and flowers at memorial sites. His music surged back onto the charts, and his albums sold in the millions once again. But grief was not the only thing left behind. John's death opened a complicated chapter involving his estate and finances. Despite his immense success, his financial situation at the time of his death was surprisingly tangled. There were questions about royalties, song rights, and property ownership. His 3 children, Zachary, Anna Kate, and Jessie Bell, were at the center of inheritance matters, while Annie quietly stayed in the background, respecting their privacy. As the legal complexities played out, one thing became clear: John Denver's cultural legacy was untouchable. His songs became timeless, played at weddings, funerals, and road trips across generations. Take Me Home, Country Roads became an anthem of nostalgia and belonging, embraced by people from West Virginia to Japan. His advocacy for nature and peace remained a guiding light for environmentalists. Yet, even as the world celebrated the artist, curiosity about the man lingered. The rumors about his temper, his controlling nature, and that infamous chainsaw incident remained unsolved mysteries. Every now and then, an article would revisit the topic, quoting passages from John's autobiography where he himself admitted to moments of rage. But without Annie's voice, the full truth stayed hidden in shadows. And Annie? She vanished from public life almost completely. For decades, she stayed silent, living quietly, avoiding interviews, never capitalizing on John's fame. Her silence became almost mythical, making the questions louder with each passing year. For the next 2 decades, Annie Denver became a figure of intrigue precisely because of her absence. In an era where ex-spouses of celebrities often wrote tell-all books, Annie chose the opposite path. She never authored a memoir, never gave sensational interviews, never sought the spotlight. Instead, she focused on her private life, raising her children and finding peace away from the glare of fame. The public, however, never stopped wondering. Journalists tried repeatedly to reach her, especially after John's autobiography revealed shocking details about his behavior during their marriage. Did she confirm what he wrote? Did she forgive him? Was the chainsaw incident real, or was it a metaphor, as some speculated? Occasionally, Annie surfaced briefly in rare interviews or public appearances, but always with restraint. When she spoke of John, it was only about his music and his passion for nature. She never spoke about the darker chapters, never fed the rumors. In one brief comment years ago, she simply said, "I will always love the man I married, no matter how things ended." Her silence only deepened the mystery. Fans filled online forums with theories. Some insisted that Annie was protecting John's legacy. Others believed she stayed silent for the sake of their children. Whatever the reason, Annie Martel, once at the center of one of music's greatest love stories, remained an enigma. And then, in 2025, the unexpected happened. At 78 years old, Annie Denver finally agreed to an interview. For the first time in over 40 years, she opened her heart and addressed the question that had haunted her for decades: the truth about John Denver and the rumor that never died. It happened quietly, without fanfare. Annie Denver didn't choose a flashy magazine or a primetime television slot. Instead, she sat down for a deeply personal interview with a respected journalist who promised her dignity and honesty. The room was simple: no stage lights, no makeup teams, just Annie in her own home in Aspen, surrounded by the mountains John once sang about. At 78, Annie was elegant and serene, her silver hair framing a face marked by time but glowing with grace. When the interviewer asked the inevitable question, "Why now?" Annie smiled softly. "Because I'm old enough to know that the truth matters," she said. "Not for the tabloids, not for gossip, but for understanding. John was a beautiful man, but he wasn't perfect. None of us are." And then, the words everyone had waited decades to hear. Was the rumor true? Annie took a breath, her eyes glistening. "Yes," she said. "It happened. The chainsaw story is true. It was one of the darkest days of our marriage." She explained what really happened, that during the final months of their marriage, an argument spiraled out of control. John, overwhelmed by anger and frustration, took a chainsaw to their bed. "It wasn't about hurting me physically," she clarified. "It was about control. About making a statement. John could be passionate and tender, but he could also be volatile. That's the truth." Annie didn't stop there. She spoke about John's struggles with anger and control, about the pressure of fame that changed him, and about her own heartbreak. "The man the world loved was real," she said, "but so was the man who struggled behind closed doors." And yet, through it all, there was no bitterness in her voice. Only love and sorrow. "I forgave him a long time ago," Annie whispered. "Because I know the man I fell in love with never truly left. He was lost in the storm of fame. But at his core, John was good. He just couldn't always find his way back." Her eyes filled with tears as she ended with this. "If you take anything from this, let it be this. Love is complicated. People are complicated. John gave the world his best. And I'll love him until the day I die." The revelation broke headlines. Fans reacted with shock, sadness, and compassion. For decades, they had romanticized John and Annie as a perfect couple. Now they saw them as something far more real. Two people who loved deeply, fought fiercely, and in the end, carried scars that time could never fully erase. For decades, fans debated whether John Denver, America's golden-voiced folk hero, truly had a dark side. His songs were gentle, full of optimism and love for nature. Could the man who wrote Annie's song and Sunshine on My Shoulders really have been capable of rage and destruction? Annie Denver's confession at 78 finally brought clarity. Yes, John had a temper, Annie admitted. He was human. Fame magnified everything. His passion, his insecurities, and his anger. The chainsaw incident wasn't something I'm proud of, and I know he wasn't proud of it either. She explained the context. Their marriage had been crumbling under the weight of John's demanding career and his perfectionist personality. Annie, a private soul, felt suffocated by the constant public attention. John, desperate to maintain control, grew frustrated when the life he had envisioned with Annie began to fall apart. "It wasn't about violence against me," Annie clarified. "It was about him losing control of a life he thought he could hold together. Cutting that bed in half wasn't about hurting me, it was his way of saying, this is over and I can't fix it." Why did she wait more than 40 years to speak? Annie sighed before answering. "Because I didn't want to define John by his worst moments," she said softly. "I wanted the world to remember the man who wrote songs that brought joy and healing. He made mistakes, yes, but he also gave so much beauty to the world." Annie's revelation was not an attempt to destroy John's image, but rather to humanize him. "John was complicated," she said. "We all are. Loving him was the greatest gift of my life, even if it broke my heart." Her words painted a portrait far richer than the rumor alone. They revealed a man of passion and flaws, a man who carried both light and shadow within him. A man who was, in the end, profoundly human. As the interview neared its end, the journalist asked Annie what she wanted fans to take away from her story. Her answer was simple yet profound. "I want people to remember John for his music and his heart," she said. "Not the rumor, not the mistakes, but the songs that made them feel something." She paused, her voice trembling slightly. "If you've ever been comforted by Sunshine on My Shoulders or felt peace listening to Rocky Mountain High, then you felt John's soul. That's who he was at his core, a man searching for beauty, for meaning." Annie also reflected on the lessons of their marriage. "Love isn't perfect," she said. "We lived in an age when people believed in fairy tales, and for a while, we were one. But real love is messy, and fame makes it messier. If I could tell my younger self anything, it would be this: love deeply, forgive quickly, and never let anger win." Finally, she spoke about closure. "After all these years, I feel lighter," she admitted. "I carried this silence because I wanted to protect him. But truth is love too. And I love John. I always will." Those words were Annie's gift to the world, a final, tender tribute to the man who gave her a song that will live forever. If you were moved by John Denver's story and Annie's revelation, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more celebrity revelations. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an emotional journey like this one.